Hi everybody, it's Grandmama. Today's story, Montesano's Tug-of-War. Hello there. We dabbled a bit in history last week, and because it was the week marking the anniversary of the discovery of our harbor by that great and intrepid voyager, Captain Robert Gray, but our scrapbook, although it includes a little of everything about the place in which we live, doesn't run strong to history, and tonight we're going back into the local archives to bring back the story of Montesano's ill-started public events that started to increase interest in Saturday night shopping and ended by nearly breaking a local merchant's business up. It's the story of a community enterprise that backfired, and it has lots of good laughs. And no one laughs louder when a story is told than the Montesano businessman who promoted the venture. So when Dick Crombie has taken a few seconds for words from our sponsor, we'll open the scrapbook to the story of the tug-of-war on Main Street, one athletic event that Montesano will never forget. Now Dick, some words from our sponsor. Our story took place back in the early 1930s. The dim and unhappy 1930s, when our national economy had suddenly been jarred to its very foundation and business had folded right and left. It was a time when the small town merchants were fighting tooth and nail to keep their little businesses solvent, and civic-minded individuals were striving with everything at their command to keep their communities alive and flourishing. It was no small task here in the lumber country, for the mills were idle, the camps were closed, and the struggle for survival by the average businessman was grim and frightening. And one day, the Montesano Chamber of Commerce Committee for Local Promotions met to talk over possible ways of stimulating traffic into town to increase the shopping in Montesano. Almost every kind of promotion day known to merchants had been tried, and they had all failed miserably. Saturday was the only shopping day of the week, and even then the potential buyers who came downtown to the county seat were few and had lean pocketbooks. The various members of the committee passed along their ideas, which were met by cool receptions one by one, until finally Clint Winters, that's the Clint Winters who once had an ice cream parlor in Montesano's long ago past, and whose cigar store and pool hall were foundations of the town's social activities. Clint had an idea that they listened to with interest. What Montesano needs, Clint said to the intended committee, is some sort of free show right on Main Street that will draw people to town. We can't afford to hire a carnival every Saturday night to bring in folks, but we could have some sort of competition between various parts of the county and offer prizes that would make it worth the effort to try. And then he laid out some schemes in full. Clint had been doing some thinking. Montesano couldn't afford to sponsor a theatrical troupe or an outdoor pageant every Saturday, but what about an old-fashioned tug-of-war? If teams could be obtained from Wanuchi, Satsop, and South Valley and other areas around the town, and if they could be pitted against each other each Saturday night in a public exhibition, it would draw folks in from all around. The tug-of-war could be early, and then when it's over and the prize awarded, folks would have time to drop into stores and shop. It sounded good. For a prize, they said $100 to go to the Grange Fund. Or perhaps for merchandise prizes, they could attract some teams to the competition, and the teams would attract the shoppers. And of course, the shoppers would rejuvenate business. Yes, it sounded like a good idea. And Clint Winters was named to head the committee to plan the program for the season. He used the offices of the town's newspaper, the Montesano Viadet, and the editorial finesse of its editor, Chapin Collins to call to the attention of the whole valley Montesano's big promotion. It was to be the biggest display of brute strength and athletic skill ever staged in the county. Well, something about the idea appealed to everyone. The merchants were all enthusiastic about it, and now the dwellers in the outlying districts began to show interest. Winoochee announced that it would have a big tug-of-war show. He used the offices of the town's newspaper, the Montesano Viadet, and the editorial finesse of its editor, Chapin Collins, to call to the attention of the whole valley Montesano's big promotion. It was to be the biggest display of brute strength and athletic skill ever staged in the county. Well, something about the idea appealed to everyone. The merchants were all enthusiastic about it, and now the dwellers in the outlying districts began to show interest too. Winoochee announced that it would have a tug-of-war team that would pull the earth off its orbit. Satsop declared that it would throw a team together that would pull Montesano into Mason County. The Schaefer Brothers Logging Organization got a team together that claimed it trained by pulling 6-foot logs up hills. By the time the little town was ready for the first tug-of-war, there were half a dozen teams ready to pull the opposition onto the wrong side. Meanwhile, the committee had gone ahead with its plan to help each team keep its footing and to make it a fair game of strength. They had constructed long ladders with stout rungs that were laid out in the street over the paving. The pullers would stand on the rungs of the ladder to obtain sure footholds. The stout rope was attained and properly knotted at intervals to make sure holders for the tug-of-wars. A panel of officials was named for the contest, headed by Dr. Berry, the town's physician, who was later to gain nationwide fame and an extended stay in a state institution for failure to observe the law of the land. When everything was ready, they sounded the call for the first 2 teams to meet on the street in downtown Montesano on Saturday night. The tug-of-war was to begin at 7:30, and the committee had it figured that the event couldn't last more than half an hour, which would give the people who came to town another hour to shop when it was all over. That Saturday night, Montesano hummed with excitement, and its streets got crowded with citizens who had come to witness the big event. Well, 2 of the teams squared away on the ladders, took their holds on the stout rope, got their feet solidly on the rungs, and at the signal from the officials, put their backs into it. They pulled each other, first one way and then the other, and finally settled down to a steady pull that neither could break. 8 o'clock came, then 8:30. It was nearly 9 before one team weakened, or one strengthened, and managed to tug-of-war the other and win the prize. There was so little time left that most of the merchants stayed open till 10 o'clock to permit the crowd to shop. But the committee pointed out it was a success. But they were sure that future events wouldn't last so long. The next week, the teams met on the wooden ladder pulled until after 10, and the merchants stayed open until 11 to permit shoppers to get around after the tug-of-war. And the next week, the teams tugged until 10 again. Saturday night in Montesano had become an ordeal for the merchants. They were staying open hours after normal closing time, and while the people were coming to town, they scarcely had time to shop. And then came the Saturday night that Montesano will never forget. As the teams had competed with each other, it became plain that there were 2 teams just about equal in ability. They were Satsop and Winoochee. They had not yet met, but they had defeated all the other oppositions. So when the committee announced that next week Satsop and Winoochee would meet, well, it was plain to everyone that this would be the biggest event since Jake Kilran fought John L. Sullivan. Merchants made big plans for it. Moreover, the committee shoved the starting time down to 7 o'clock to make sure that there would be lots of time to shop afterwards. Oh, it was carefully planned, and the Montesano merchants rubbed their hands to contemplate the crowd that would turn out to watch the giant competition. And they did. The crowds fairly swarmed the streets that night, and when the two teams took the center of the street, it looked like everyone in the valley was there. The officials looked more official, the judges more judicial, and the committee gloated at the professional way that everything was handled. The two teams, about as stout a collection of backs and brawny arms as could be assembled in the county, took their places on their ladder amid shouts and cheers, and a few side bets between the team members as they would win and how long it would take. And when the judges fired the starting gun, the two teams of tuggers leaned on their job with a unison and a fierce will that made it serious business. The crowd cheered encouragement for its favorites, and the rope fairly sang as it grew taut under the powerful pull. The men lay almost horizontal on the ladders, their feet braced against their arms, straining at the rope. Neither one side nor the other could budge the other. Well, 8 o'clock came, when the time the merchants were hoping the business with the crowded shoppers would be happening, and the teams of Satsup and Ranucci were still deadlocked on the ladder. Neither could it move the other team. It was now raining. 9 o'clock came, same thing. The crowd was now beginning to thin out. Some were going home disappointed and sure that it would be declared a draw. But the team captain refused to give in. No, it would not be declared a draw. Keep tugging. 10 o'clock, and the sweat was running down their faces, and broad shoulders were rigid and continuously being pulled, but none would quit. That is, none but the spectators. The crowd grew thinner by the hour. Some merchants opened their stores in the hopes of catching customers who had deserted the tug-of-war, but most of the people who abandoned the arena were hurrying back up the Ranucci or up to Satsop so they could catch a few hours of sleep before milking time. By 11 o'clock, some of the merchants themselves had locked their doors and gone home. But the two teams remained struggling on the ladders. The judges were now sweating as fiercely as the participants in the tug-of-war, and Clint Winters had disappeared. The officials kept looking at their watches and then the thinning crowd. Finally, it was midnight, and the rain, yes, it was still raining, and the rain dripped dismally from the hats of the judges, and it completely soaked the contestants. Finally, Dr. Barry, at the request of the committee to do something, went from one team captain to the other, declaring that the tug-of-war must stop. It was a matter of critical importance. The medical advice, explained, must stop now before someone drops dead of heart failure. The tuggers relaxed on the ropes and lay prone on the ladders exhausted. The judges declared it a draw and thought that would settle it. But when the first of the tug-of-wars were able to rise, he protested that his team would have won if it had gone another 5 minutes. Both teams took up the chant, and Clint Walker's great scheme reached its climax. But Dick, I want you to say a few words from our sponsors first before we finish the tale of the tug-of-war. Well, it was nearly daylight when the last of the tug-of-war teams left Montesano, and the judges had been roundly denounced by both sides for stopping the contest. The Ranucci team members tried to organize a boycott of Montesano merchants for calling it a draw, and Satsop's teams refused to participate in any more Montesano tug-of-wars. But they could have saved their win. No more were ever held. The merchants gave up. Clint Winters left town and didn't come back for a week, and when he did come back, his only retort to the threats of his neighbors, well, they held some good tug-of-war events back in 1910, to which the neighbors answered, yes, but they didn't use ladders. They didn't have to, Clint retorted. The streets weren't paved. That gave them good blame. They blamed it on the paved streets and tried to forget about it, but we find it here tonight as a memory in our hometown scrapbook. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.